the concept of doing a master study has been around for a long time. And the simple concept is that we just kind of copy an existing painting, and by doing that, we learn about it. Now, we can copy it and focus on particular things. And obviously for this week, our primary focus is on color, but there's also plenty of other things we can look at because, of course, color is influenced by sort of brush strokes and application. And really what we're trying to do is kind of understand how color works in painting and art, not necessarily how color works, in other areas. And I can't really think of a better way to learn about color because, as I was saying in the overview demo, it's one of those things like perspective where many people know the rules, but it still doesn't necessarily mean that everything always turns out great. So what we can do is we can look at kind of how color has been used in the past, and we can understand from that by actually observing what's happening with each stroke, with each color, and how those colors are combining and how this color scheme is being used. So what we're going to do is just do some master studies. And again, the real goal here with doing a master study is to learn. Probably the kind of there's no real objective success for doing a master study. We study a painting to learn kind of what we want from it. So again, in this scenario, we're focusing mainly on color and how color is used. But again, you can kind of study what you want as long as you're sort of also studying color. But it also means that, again, it's very hard for an objective critique, both of yourself and, from others when it comes to a master study, besides like it doesn't look exactly like a master painting. And I guess really the true goal is to copy a master painting and have it look exactly stroke for stroke exactly like that painting. But obviously all the details of a painting don't make up sort of every aspect of a painting. Like there's different aspects of a painting that we can sort of look at. So the first we're going to look at is just the thumbnail aspect of paintings which have been done before, and try to get a feel for kind of what color is actually in an image. So you might kind of say, oh, I saw this image and it was kind of, what kind of color was it? And if you haven't done a lot of color work, it might be hard in the same way to sort of, that it's sort of hard to critique like anything, if we don't know about it, it's hard to kind of observe and say like, oh, it was this color scheme and this is how much it was used. And I was really interested in how, these blues were interacting with this other color and this was happening and there was good interplay between this and this really worked. And until you've done a lot of looking at images and actually focusing on it, it's very tricky to understand what's happening. In the same way, it's sort of, if you don't know much about anatomy, it's very tricky to sort of actually go in there and say like, well, why does this not look right? Because we don't know about it. So again, the more we study paintings, the easier it is for us to actually remember when we come to do our own paintings, like, right, no. I remember that this person had a similar color scheme, but these blues looked blue, but they weren't actually blue. They were this other color, and this was happening, and this was the difference between it's not just that it was kind of, oh, this was all red and this was all blue. It was a particular type of blue. It was a particular type of red. Again, if you're looking at tonalist sort of images, again, like this one, it's about what are the actual value relationships between these kind of cool and warm colors. What is the difference? It's not just, oh, this is kind of warm and this is cool, and isn't it fancy that warm and cool colors, when you put them together and blah, blah, blah. Like, you can say that, but if you don't remember exactly what value this was, and if you can't say, no, that was like, it was about a sort of a 25, and probably like as a hue, so it was a red, but it was sort of desaturated, so it was probably like 50% gray, like 50% black, and sort of 20% So it's going to be, I reckon it's going to be somewhere sort of around, like kind of there, somewhere around there. No, it's going to be closer to like sort of there. So we'll see kind of how far off I am. A little bit off. It was more saturated than I thought. But, you know, that one is kind of close, and it was actually more like 34, sort of whatever. So, again, like think, like what is this one? Like what color is it? Again, you can just go like, oh, it's orange. No. There's no such thing as orange. What color is it? Again, it's like a 23, highly saturated, not much black. So again, what's this one? This one's going to be sort of, again, still around there, but it's going to be probably like even more saturated, same kind of color. So what's happening? Look at it. And again, what's happening on the walls? What's this one? That's over here. This is what's happening with these values. What happens when we change it to make this kind of gray? Oh, this is what happens. That's what we need to find out from these studies. It's not just like, oh, look at that. That's kind of cool. You know, like click. Now I'm just going to paint my thing and then sort of mess around and be like, oh, why is it not working? That person was trying it. Oh, they must just be really good at it. This is all stuff that you have to internalize. And if you think this is hard, just consider, again, the vast majority, in fact, every single one of these paintings, I think, was painted with a brush on canvas. We're doing it in Photoshop. No complaining, basically. No complaining about how hard this is or anything like that. Forget about it. The degree to which people understood their palettes was, far more sophisticated than what we're doing. We've just got a bunch of numbers. We're sliding some sliders. We've got an eyedropper. People are actually calculating, oh, this is sort of, you know, I get this color by mixing this color, this color, this color precisely, and they remember it. And they would remember exactly what that color was. They would know exactly how to get this kind of color. You would mix it. You'd like, you know, make sure you had the right color. Maybe like, you know, try it out somewhere on the painting. But in general, once you get to quite an advanced state, you would be able to kind of guess, oh, that kind of color is going to be this, this, and this. And this is how I get this gray. I add, you know, like one little smidge of kind of gray, and then this becomes this color. So yes, it is that complicated, and if you just put some effort into it, it becomes a lot less complicated and a lot more intuitive. But it's definitely something where we're not going to be using the eyedropper like that when we're painting and trying to make it easy. That's not how you learn about color or what's going on. So the basic idea is we just want to initially just sort of think about what are some colors that we like in images, and sort of how are these images constructed, you know, like what's in them, and just check. The most important thing here is how your assumption breaks down upon actual observation. So again, I was like, oh, I reckon that's about there. I'm not going to make that mistake when I'm recording a video and saying like, oh, it's about 20, it's not 30. It's like, no, that one was a yellow. It was definitely a yellow. So yeah, be very aware of what you're thinking a color is versus what it is. So I'm just going to pick a few of these sort of images. I'm going to pick sort of 5 to begin with, and we're just going to sort of look at sort of how they're constructed. I've got a blue one, a kind of impressionist one. I've got a painting. I've got, how about this one? Right, so let's just open all these up in Photoshop. And again, the choice that we have here is some of these are larger than others. And obviously when we're doing thumbnails, it doesn't matter that much, right? The real key is just to sort of understand the overall what's happening. So if you're doing a larger study, which we'll be doing sort of next, then obviously you want to pay attention to the details, and some of these images might be a lot harder to do a really detailed study of. But for just sort of saying like what color is there, what is happening, what's going on, and to study it, these are going to be fine. going to make sure I didn't accidentally squash that. All right. So again, there's lots of ways you can do this. I think this is a fairly simple way of doing it. What I might need to do is just extend. No, I'll just make this Monet a bit smaller. So one of the things is that all these images are just sort of in our one folder. If you're not sure who painted an image, you can actually use Google image search to search images now, and it's quite easy. You just drag it basically onto Google image search, and it will just search for that image, and often it comes up with sort of, very shortly after it sort of says, oh, this is done by so and so. So if you're ever curious who painted an image, because it can be sort of hard to tell, and you're interested in maybe finding some more, just use a Google image search for that image and it should kind of come up. All right, so obviously we need to figure out sort of how wide and tall these are. I think that's a good exercise in itself to kind of get the scale right, but let's not do two things at once. I've copied them all. I've copied them down. What I'm going to do is make a new layer, and I'm going to stroke it. Maybe about like so I've kind of got a very faint outline that might be useful. But what I'm going to do is just I'm going to make it really easy for myself. I've got all of these on one layer because I merged them together, and I've got these 5. And again, there's no point in making it harder than it needs to be. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lock the transparency, and I'm going to make them all sort of a very sort of faint gray color. Let's make them almost white so we can just see a difference. And then what I can do is let's see, again, probably I could leave them all on one layer. Maybe I'll do that. I'll just leave them all on one layer. So I've just got a locked layer. Again, we're not going to do any sort of messing around with layers or anything like that. It's just about painting flat, just sort of one color. So again, if you were to eyedrop, we'd be kind of doing this, right? And just kind of painting around, and we're just kind of focusing on form, and we're drawing. That's kind of can be good. Again, if you're sort of drawing and you're like, I'm not sure if you're really getting lost, do one eyedropping just so you can get a feel for kind of how it would work if you did know exactly what colors they are. It won't count as the assignment. Like you can do as many eyedropping as you want. You can trace as many as you want. You can cheat as much as you want. You still have to do the assignment on top of that, though. And how will anyone tell if you eyedrop the colors? I don't know. Just you don't want to be that guy who we found out that you eyedrop the colors, because it'll be embarrassing. So just don't. And if you want to roll the dice and try and bet against us being mind readers, go for it. But in general, you're only cheating yourself by doing this, and you're only you can only sort of learn what you can learn from doing it. So you have to really gauge what level you're at and what's going to help you. So if you think maybe doing a couple by just sort of guessing is going to be good, sorry, not by guessing, but by sort of eyedroppering, then go for it. But then still do the sort of, the assignment on top of that, because it's all about learning. So again, it's important to state that, you're not going to learn as much, and you're probably not going to really get to the point where you understand color until you're doing this without using the eyedropper at all. But the eyedropper can be a really good tool to kind of learn, because again, you are actually learning. But if I just kind of paint here, and I do this with the eyedropper, and I just kind of and I'm not paying attention, and I'm just, what I'm doing as I'm doing this is I'm not looking up here, right? Whereas if I am sort of saying like, okay, I need to paint this, what color is this? And I'm sort of saying, okay, maybe it's sort of somewhere around here, like, no, that's a bit wrong. Maybe it's sort of somewhere around here, like, no, that's wrong. This is actually much closer to what will happen when you are painting your own paintings, is that you're thinking what color goes where, what color is it, slide, 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 you're doing it. If you're just copying here, you're never going to be painting like that, saying like, oh, here's a copy of the painting I made that I haven't made yet, let's just eyedropper it. So again, this all should be obvious, but I think there is a kind of a natural tendency to be like, well, I know how I could do this task really easily. But that doesn't mean that we can't use the eyedropper to a degree. And I would say just sort of get a feel for like what kind of colors are in there, like what kind of colors are happening. And the second step, again, if you're having real trouble with this, like you're doing this and it's just looking like fluorescent colors or something's going on, is to make a swatch and say, okay, like the kind of lights are like this, the dark bits are like this, the kind of red dark bits are like this, the really dark bits are like that, the yellows are kind of like this, and we've got all these different sort of colors in there. This is what's happening. Again, like the gold, what happens in the gold? Oh, it's kind of like this in the highlight, and it's like this in the shadow, and then sort of say, okay, and it kind of got these other brighter yellows in there. If you need to do this, then do that as well. Again, it's not going to count for the assignment. That's not the point. The point is to guess and try as much as you can to guess. But this is certainly a very useful tool to get you looking at the colors. But only do this if you are paying attention to what sort of color it is. Anyway, I'm going to have a go at doing it sort of without, and we'll sort of see how that goes. It might be an idea to tone down your the back of your canvas as well, so it's not kind of white. The white can be quite sort of overpowering, so I might try that again. Personally, I haven't done a lot of this sort of stuff. So what I might do before I do it is just kind of go along with the eyedropper and sort of say like, these are grays. What kind of gray are they? It seems like kind of in the shadow here, we're talking about sort of, again, sort of, it's actually a blue, but it's only about 4% saturated, and they're about 70% value. So these kind of things here, and in the shadow, we're talking about like 20 points down, and the shadows are a lot warmer. So, these kind of darker faces are sort of in the warm range. They're a little bit more saturated, where it's sort of 40, like again, this kind of 34 hue, which is kind of just, it's like orange. If you turn it all the way up, you can see it's orange. So again, we're kind of orange, but just really low saturated orange in the shadows. And the orange is like a sepia, like a burnt umber kind of color. So it's something you'll see a lot. In the sort of highlights, we can see again, it's a blue. It's like a really white. So again, we kind of got these blues, and it's sort of in between for these ones. But it's definitely a blue, but it's only 3%. So it's a white, but it's a cool white versus a warm white. And again, these lights, these things which kind of look white, are sort of around 95%. There's nothing much that's really, even these things which look really white, there's nothing that's sort of super white. I don't, you might be able to find something that's sort of 100%, but still, you're looking at like 95%. And I'm imagining that even those are kind of a bit blown out. The original probably wouldn't have that white, obviously, because it's, painted on a, even the whitest canvas is still not as white as a monitor like this. But anyway, so that's kind of what I'm looking at. These whites are different sort of saturations. They're all kind of like 85 to 90. And there's nothing that's really above 10% saturation. So that's important to notice. Let's look at, again, something like these darks. These darks they look like they're sort of that yellow, like burnt umber sort of thing. Again, 40. And again, we're looking at a JPEG, so you're only ever going to get so far. But it looks like there's it's that same sort of burnt umber sort of color, like, around here, sort of 20 to 40 to 50 in there. But they're all sort of like, these are like, again, this is quite black up here. When it's black, it's sort of, again, I think that's because it's a bad sort of scan. I think there'd be more information in some of these blacks in the actual original, but we're at sort of 5% where it's black. And where it's black, it's not quite as saturated. It's sort of 20% where it's black. Where it gets sort of into these like warm colors around here, we're looking at sort of 50% saturation, a little bit lighter. And again, we're sort of going up here. These are kind of still dark colors, but we're at sort of 50, like 60% saturation. Again, this sort of robe, let's look at it. We're at 50, sort of still quite dark. So very sort of like medium saturation. There's no really, really bright colors here. Let's look at sort of the brightest colors over here, like this kind of yellow, which looks quite vibrant. We're still at like 70% saturation, nothing really, really saturated. Let's look at these kind of yellows. Again, it's not saturated. So even these sort of colors. So there's nothing really that's sort of that seems to me like it's sort of over 70% saturation. That's important to note. And most of it is sort of like 50, anything that's kind of looks rich is sort of at 60% saturation, 50% saturation. So yeah, again, these guys back here, it's all kind of in that burnt umber sort of range. Again, we got these kind of whites. We're at 96. It's a bit more saturated, and again, these are kind of around there. So you can sort of see like, that sort of helps. Helps to begin with, because I know like, okay, like these kind of colors down here, it's blue. It's kind of might be at sort of like very low saturation. We might be sort of again in that sort of this sort of range for some of these kind of colors, and obviously some of the other sort of lighter colors down here. So it's sort of we're like in and around this kind of vein, looking at it. And again, if we sort of look at that black was a kind of, it's all around this sort of burnt umber sort of range. And it was sort of, we were looking at some of the blacks they were quite desaturated and sort of right down around that kind of 10%. Let's switch to a round brush just so, just get the basics here. For this kind of thing, I think it's probably much better to use a sort of a round brush. So again, we kind of got a shape here. And what was happening is that the saturation was kind of going up, but I don't think that, I think it was becoming a lot more sort of, we had some of these kind of colors in there, a bit more yellow. And so if we divide up the image, that's like a good way to sort of do it. I've got the exact proportions. Again, that's a little bit of a cheat, but there's no point in, again, making that sort of thing harder than it needs to be. And so all I'm trying to do is kind of start to get the right sort of feeling of color in there. It feels like it's too sort of yellow. This needs to be a lot more sort of, I think, saturated in there. And again, I keep automatically wanting to go up and sample from the image. That's kind of my natural inclination. So if I ever do that, I can be in big trouble. So just kind of start to try and get some of the rough kind of values in there. Again, this looks like it's a bit sort of lighter, a bit more yellow. So it looks like this kind of breaks down, and I'm guessing kind of in here. Want to get the white off the page, sort of to begin with. So again, looking at these sort of white colors. And got to get roughly the right sort of shape. So I didn't check the skin tone. Kind of guess. I think that is quite sort of bright. So I've kind of like, once I've picked the colors, again, I think these ones were sort of a bit more like this down here. There might have been some kind of darker bits. Guessing at that, this stuff is a lot sort of darker. I'm going to indicate what's going along here before I actually put in the darker tones. And it seems like down here we kind of have this shape here. And what you will find with this kind of image is that frequently it is actually created with sort of quite similar images, similar colors, because you know the palette is kind of simple. Artists don't necessarily have all the time in the world to sit there mixing random colors. Of course, these things are going to be made up of similar colors. It's just lighter colors and darker colors. And all that, you know, it's like, yeah, should be, hopefully be sort of self-evident. And obviously, sort of, you know, this is it's a lot easier to sort of just, you know, get an image that kind of works when we're sort of, you know, basing it off like an amazing composition, and it's not necessarily the achievement that we might kind of want to sort of be like, oh, I kind of figured out the color scheme. All it really does is it gives us a feel for, again, sort of what kind of colors actually go into making this, and sort of what the color relationships are. And the idea is simply that by doing this, we kind of learn what's happening in images and kind of how I might select these sort of things to kind of create my own image. But often it is quite easy to get to sort of dismiss what is actually going on in an image when we look at it. You might sort of say, well, like this is my favorite image, and I'm a blah blah blah. But how much do I actually know about that image? It's only when we sort of study it that we get a good sort of feel for what's actually going on there. So again, I'm looking at that. It seems like this kind of actually starts along here, goes kind of and all these aspects of this image are I'm at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's like we go up here. This also teaches you a lot about sort of drawing from reference and just gauging as well. But yeah, but all these little bits and pieces that we might not have noticed before when we're kind of thinking about, oh, this is the important bit of the image. Those are actually frequently the bits that are kind of important, that get lost, that we don't notice because they're not the star of the image. There's often little bits and pieces around the place which are holding everything up that make it easier for everything to work. So I've got 1, 2, she's on the third step, so she's kind of here. Got another one here, and then we've got 1, 2, 3. That's kind of right. And then another one. She's kind of like there, and then kind of a final one. And there is a slight kind of line along the top. So again, just look at the image. What's happening with the image? So I've kind of got these pillars, and these look a lot more blue. I don't know how to get kind of blue. And yeah, I think another thing that will probably be happening with this is that, so this is kind of like in line with her head. And in line with kind of his head, so their heads are in line. Important to just do the basic sort of drawing. I know that these colors are kind of similar. So we kind of have some stuff sort of fading, but this is kind of, if you draw a line across it, they're pretty much got 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, kind of 4, and 5, and another kind of line that kind of goes along the top. This guy is down way lower than I thought, so I've got to change that. So again, it's just teaching me like what is actually there color-wise, what's happening, how do I get a certain effect. And what kind of makes this image work. It's like a thing there. And again, I keep wanting to go up and select. So I'm like, I know whether, I think it's because so used to kind of saying like, oh, I need a color, and you just kind of select it from a painting. But in this case, it's sort of like the painting is there. So again, this line head is kind of and you notice I've tried to sort of avoid creating too many, like I'm trying to avoid using a smaller brush. I think that's pretty important. Try not to just sort of create, try to do as much as you possibly can, get it as close as you can by just kind of using, a relatively large brush. That's where, again, you'll learn the most. That's very similar to how you'd sort of create a painting if you're working best practice. So it's sort of a lot easier to kind of just sort of do it this way. So I've kind of got this creates this sort of curve in here. These steps might be slightly off perspective. So yeah, you can see that color-wise, there's some extra stuff kind of happening back here that I'm not getting. And the more, I don't know how. I think maybe making it a bit more. Just punching it up, making it a little bit more vibrant. And again, I think these over here are a little bit more vibrant. And it's not that, again, I need a different brush to do this. What I need is maybe a smaller brush would help. But again, I'm still kind of avoiding that. But what would help would be, I feel like this needs to be a bit kind of less saturated. It's that these values need to be changed so that it feels more like things are shiny or things are not shiny. But again, that's not. This whole thing is not sort of working very well. Yeah, it's important to just sort of try and get that same feeling without trying to create too much texture or anything like that. So this is kind of in line. But I think this thing is, in mine, is too far. This thing actually goes further this to the left. Which gives this thing a bit more sort of space. You can see that it's kind of like got this arch. It's not quite that extreme. And this thing is kind of got this line along here. Again, it's not quite that light, but again, I'm sort of trying to find some of the shapes. And we got the lion head kind of, just kind of trying to get this spacing right. And as you can see, there's no point in even thinking about moving forward until, you know, all of this stuff is kind of worked out. Got these guys in the background, very faint. There's no point even trying to move forward until all of these kind of things are blocked out. So I think that's kind of closer, except I think it's going to be like down here. We're going to get some kind of slight more indication of, I think the face is kind of a bit more value here. But I'm just trying to kind of indicate the general sort of value. But you've got kind of the mouth of the line, and this is kind of almost, it's like this comes up and pretty much kind of touches. I'm just going to get rid of that. It's not helping. So you can see this whole area is kind of quiet. Hard to see. Just trying to get the shape of the I feel like the overall, I think it's the position of the head is kind of poor, but it's quite hard to get all of those indications happening. And again, we could use a smaller brush to do some of these lines, but again, I'm still resisting using a smaller brush. So you can see it's a very nicely designed image. There's lots of good stuff happening. It's very sort of easy to define the form here, because we've got this sort of, because the image is set up very nicely. So that's also something that you'll really notice by doing these, is that again, I'm starting to draw too much. I'm thinking too much, not copying enough, not getting the forms right. I think this whole thing is up a little bit. Maybe not that much. Again, I think it's still starting to get there. Probably need that kind of really hot. So again, try as much as you can to not mess around with the brushes, and see if you can do absolutely as much as possible with one brush. Again, this is, it would be a lot easier for me to go and kind of add these details with a smaller brush, but things will always look a lot more natural if you can figure out how to create the shapes you want. Using different brushes than you might sort of think. So you can see the top of her head is kind of gets lost, but the bottom of the hair is definitely not lost. So yeah, go into as much detail as you need. But don't get lost in sort of small brushes. It's not gonna help anyone. One of the major things that sort of, I think, defines something and makes it look sort of painterly and lets you sort of understand color is understanding specifically kind of like how to get a certain effect while having to do it with a weird brush or in some kind of way that is might appear a bit strange. So yeah, I mean that you could stop there, and it's probably sensible too, because again, I'm just kind of noodling around, and I'm sort of learning. I'm interested in a lot of the shapes and the painting that's going on, but we've got sort of a general idea of what's happening with the color. Some things are still off. And if we were to go in with a different brush, I'd probably say it would be good to sort of start to highlight some of these things and start to get that sort of sense of space in there. Again, it'd be good to get this thing happening. But the general idea is if you kind of zoom out, like you shouldn't be able to tell the difference between them. And we're kind of, we're not quite there, but it's kind of close. And mostly I think it's kind of this thing is a bit heavy-handed. There's a line here, though it's small. This I think seems to be like it's a bit cooler. Something like that. Got some of this stuff happening. And obviously like there's other stuff happening here, but again, that's probably taking longer than I would suggest. We could also sort of, try and make it a lot quicker. So let's sort of pick one and see if we can just sort of do it quickly and get a feel for sort of what was happening in another image. But let's say in this one we'll sort of take maybe like 5 minutes. Let's try 5 minutes and just see how that goes. So again, I'm just going to do a first sort of look and say, wow, this is kind of high saturation, 50% high saturated red. The skin is a kind of like medium saturation, kind of like, again, raw umber, kind of burnt sienna. It's around there. Probably not. I don't know. I've kind of heard those colors. I know roughly what those colors are, but someone who's actually a painter will be like, no, this, you're way off. Again, the kind of, these are all sort of playing in that same sort of vein. Everything here is pretty much warm, but you can see that some of the skin tones really move up to the yellow and sort of low saturation, so they kind of appear a lot greener than maybe they are. But let's just study the composition. Let's study sort of how this person is using color. So again, I think it was around it's like a 10 full saturation, but we're kind of at 50. So I'm gonna sort of try and put this in and just sort of think what's happening with the colors here. And the more you get sort of practice at it, the easier it will be to sort of get closer to some of these colors. So all I'm doing is I'm trying to pick colors and put them kind of in the scene. So let's kind of get rid of the white. I know that there's other colors kind of around here. So again, I think we were kind of, where were we with the skin? Somewhere like that, maybe. So I feel like we're kind of face-wise trying to pay as much attention to what's going on here. Again, some of these are there's a bit of sort of variation in here. It's not all flat, and there's some sort of darkness around there. Probably something that's sort of actually sort of going on there, but just going to indicate it. It's a bit sort of darker down here, I think a bit redder. And obviously there's a lot of there's a lot of sophistication going on with color. and it is a much easier to kind of copy this sort of thing when we've got it there. Much easier said than done if you're kind of, you're working with like a vastly sort of different size of image, or it's not kind of exactly next to they're not sort of all lined up. We've kind of got it fairly easy here. It's got a poor tiger that's been hard done by here. So red hair. And we can see we're like way off with the face and where that stuff is positioned. The skin is also, I think, a lot brighter. So again, there's a lot of sort of different colors in here. I'm still going to try and do it without going crazy with small brushes. And you may not necessarily sort of do that. That's sort of something which I'm sort of making as slightly more of an interesting way to kind of challenge myself, but I really do think it is the best way to go. So again, this is kind of off here. The face is actually kind of up. A lot further. Getting a bit kind of scrappy, which is no good. But in general, the idea is just to find the composition. trying to indicate some of this. Some of this stuff, figure out what's going on. Again, it seems like there's like an even redder kind of bow on. And just be aware of kind of where it gets dark. You know, it is getting sort of somewhat dark around the like around the face, kind of, you know, in between the sort of, you know, face and here. So this all seems a little bit more kind of yellow. But anyway, we're kind of, unless I kind of go into more detail, again, you know, I'm using like quite a large brush here. But that's kind of the point, is just to sort of think about the abstraction. So some will be something, you know, you might spend more time sort of doing. Others will be just sort of try and look at the colors that are being used as much as possible, and sort of pay attention to, again, sort of where things are on the scale if you're sort of trying to play around with it. And just sort of say, well, what colors are working here? You know, it's kind of this harmonious, like red, sort of orange, sepia kind of thing. But, you know, that's quite strong. There's a quite strong sort of contrast of value, large graphic shapes. Just trying to figure out sort of as much of that as possible. Again, I could step down brush size and do a bit more on this, or could do a variety of things, but this kind of gives us a rough idea of sort of what's happening color-wise. And we're just sort of starting to get a feel for kind of if I had to construct this image, like what would I do? How would I kind of do it? What would be going on? And that's the basic idea for doing the thumbnails. Again, it's just because it's a thumbnail doesn't mean that you know, we don't spend an hour on it, but probably it's better off if you sort of limit the time a bit and sort of simplify some, try and learn different things depending on sort of what you're doing. But for this one, it's just sort of rough it out, get the basic shapes in there, and try and use the sort of the biggest brush possible to get the same feel, so that it definitely kind of has the same vibe as the top one. And we're kind of, what I'm doing is that I'm getting in there and I'm applying color, and I'm learning as much as I can about sort of what colors were used as like highlights, shadows, and I'm just getting used to sort of picking colors here if I need to, and say like, oh, well, this is kind of, you know, maybe I need one that's a bit more saturated, a bit darker than that, so I can sort of put it in there. Or like, oh, no, this needs to be a bit more saturated, a bit less like this. But yeah, you can see we're just sort of playing around in this vein. You know, there's no sort of blues in here. There's nothing like this. Just get used to the subtlety and pay attention as much as you can to sort of what is happening here. And as we do sort of more and more detailed ones, we'll be paying more and more attention to sort of, you know, specifically what's happening with like shadows and highlights and those kind of things. But for the moment, just think about the color scheme as a thumbnail. If you were doing a thumbnail, kind of how would you design this image? Like what would be light? What would be dark? What kind of color would be in there? How would it kind of be working? And the more that you can get a feel for that, the easier it'll be for you to kind of come up with your own color schemes. Not that much easier. It's still, we're just putting things in our brain, but we'll have a better kind of muscle memory to say, like, what kind of color goes with this color? Oh, kind of this color. I remember that. I remember looking at this and actually being in it, as opposed to kind of looking at it from afar and going like, that's kind of a blue. When we're in here, we can no longer rely on colors being relative and sort of escaping with sort of certain misconceptions. We're painting it. We kind of have to look at what colors are where and sort of what's happening. It's very hard to sort of engage in self-deception. So that's the basic goal. So yeah, everyone have a go at doing these, and just kind of keep going, and just sort of play around with any kind of image that takes your fantasy, takes your fancy or your fantasy, and anything where you're like, I'm not quite sure what's going on with the color. Just have a go at doing this and just actually see what's going on with the color.